I always think about coaching as being focusing on where you have the most power, which is the present moment, and then designing your future, right? Learning from the past while you're doing it. So when we talk about the past, it's about challenging our beliefs, and it's about recognizing that there is perspective and that time changes perspective. And what do we learn from that?
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. I'm Audley Stevenson, and we're back with another edition of the most audacious podcast you'll find on the internet. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and as always, it's a pleasure to be here and to really continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. You've got it locked to episode 225 of the podcast, and we're going to focus the conversation around the role of professional coaching and what it can do in helping others reach that better place as individuals take their own audacious journey. In addition to being a master certified coach, today's guest, Nathalie Blais, is the CEO and co-founder of Canada Coach Academy, who's on a mission to train world-class coaches and mentor leaders in the coach approach so they can turn around and help others. I promise you that this is a very powerful conversation with lots and lots of great insights and learnings. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Nathalie. Enjoy. Hey, Nathalie, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. Thank you for making the time and doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Real pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm always appreciative of individuals, spending some time and engaging in these sort of conversations that I'm really passionate about. And knowing that coaching is a passion of yours, certainly makes sense. And maybe as a starting point, we can get listeners up to speed a little bit about you and the work that you do. If you could just describe, because Canada Coach Academy is, your baby as well. You're a co-founder of, and so maybe you can sort of talk about that and your work and what got you into it.
Well, Canada Coach Academy was founded in 2016, and that came about from years of actually, when I graduated university, I went to McGill, and I kind of left like a lot of people going, now what?
Right.
Got really lucky, and I was hired by a gentleman who was just an entrepreneur. And I had never really been exposed to entrepreneurs. My dad was an engineer, he worked hard all his life. But I never really had that mentality of, just contributing and adding value and not being in that structured space. I was still a student, I hadn't really had much work experience either, but I ended up just really lucky to be exposed to this man. His name is Raymond Massa. He's actually passed away very young at the age of 61, but I would consider him my first mentor. Right. And he put me into a coaching program.
Okay.
And that's what, so at the age of 23, I was going to Toronto 4 times a year to be coached in this program called Strategic Coach. And it was run by Dad.
So what year did you say this was?
Well, this would have been, I was 23. I guess it would have been the late. Yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to date you, so
I'm not talking about my age.
I was trying to do that. Where I was going to take it was because we're talking a time that coaching is still very early at this time. This is
avant-garde. At the time, nobody was talking about coaching. It was like a book on coaching. You couldn't, there were maybe some journals published, of course. And the first book, Performance Coaching, that anybody will be talking about in coaching was written by Whitmore. And that was released, I think, in 75 was the first release. But yeah, coaching was really new in business. This particular program was focused on insurance and financial industries. So helping entrepreneurs in those sectors.
Okay.
They called it break the glass ceiling, which is to see where your business can go.
Got you. From a growth standpoint.
Yeah. And I was there as a team member to support the entrepreneur. And it was a really like very, I don't know like a really sophisticated setup. There were people in that room that were really successful. The minimum requirement was you had to have $1 million in revenue for your business at the time of registering. And that was in the late 90s. That was a lot of money at the time. It's not as much money today, but it was a lot of money back then.
For sure.
And so I was in a room with really smart people learning incredible strategies for, what Carol Dweck would call the growth mindset, right? She was doing her research around 2005, 2006. And so that was really interesting how I was learning the coach mindset, which is really putting growth mindset into practice, right?
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious about, going into it, did you even fully understand yet what you were stepping into?
No, I had no idea. I'm just like, I'm going to learn this thing. I have to do this as part of my new job. And, but what I realized quickly was that the kinds of reflection, the exercises, that whole, we learn by reflecting on experience, not just the experience alone, that the power of that, open-ended questions, getting really curious about myself and the team members and collaboration. And it was a really different way of looking at, life, at opportunity. And I think, if anything, what it did was it helped me to notice the things that would lead me to where I am today that I didn't even understand I was noticing at the time, because you know what it does? It opens up your RAS, right? Your reticular activating system. So your dominant belief system starts to take in, this information. And now suddenly I'm noticing things I would have never noticed before had I not taken that program.
That's right.
And so that's what kind of led, and it was funny because then coaching kind of disappeared from my life for a while. I left that company after about, I want to say 10 years, but I don't really remember anymore. And then I started working for another company, but I mean, it left my, my consciousness, but it was always conscious. I knew, because the way that I contributed to my next role was a huge differentiator compared to how other people were contributing to the role in my same position, and that was me just noticing opportunities, asking good questions, getting involved, taking initiative, like really leading like an entrepreneur. And that was interesting. That was kind of where I started to notice I was different in how I was approaching work and life. And then I took time off. I had 2 children. I left work. I took 4 years off to raise my kids. They're back to back. So they're 17 and 18, 16 and 17 now.
Yeah. Right.
And in that time, I guess I was kind of putting my curiosity to work, because I ended up taking a freelance job writing for the local paper while I was on mat leave, because I was kind of bored and my kids started at part-time daycare.
Right. You had some time.
Yeah. I thought, what am I going to do? And I was really interested. I love to write. I've always loved to write, and communications was always my thing. So I started writing, and that led me to an opportunity to work for a local business. When I decided to go back to work, I had visualized, exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be close to home and flexible and be able to work from home sometimes, and just not have a big commute, because I wanted to be near my kids, who were very young at the time. And sure enough, this job just sort of kind of landed in front of me, and I went for the interview, and it turned out it was an international recruitment agency called Cowan International that was run by my partner, my co-founder.
Gotcha.
And so when I met him, I immediately said, you have to go and join Strategic Coach, this company in Toronto. So he did. He started at Toronto, because we were talking about coaching. Recruitment is all about development, right? And helping companies with succession planning and retention and development internally, right? So the word coaching came up a lot. And so he started the program, and I started interviewing the heads of the multinationals that he was working with at the time. And they're like, Cowan International is a small privately held company, but like, based in this town called Hudson of 5,000 people, yet global reach, international, kind of really neat how that scaled. Yeah. And so I was talking to people around the world about, how we could help them as partners, as a recruitment agency to support their needs. And so I would ask what I learned at Strategic Coach which was called the DOS questions, the dangers, opportunities, and strengths. Yes. And I'd say, so what's your biggest opportunity, and what are your biggest challenges? What's keeping you up at night? And to ask all these questions, and turned out the answer always revolved around succession planning, transferring knowledge. We were placing expats. Average, they would stay for 3 years and then leave. And they were subject matter expertise. They were high level, and so there was always this need to keep that expertise in the workplace, because, most of the people we were sending to Africa, French Africa, Latin America, Asia. And so they needed to be able to retain the skills and develop the local talent. Right. So I said, well, what's one way that you saw, that works? Like, what works in your field, and what have you noticed? And they said, there was a coach, there was a guy who coached, or there was a coaching approach, or somehow the word coach would always come up. And then Andrew and I would have these conversations about it, because he was part of those interviews too. And it was like, oh, okay, so coaching, there's something here. And then, one thing led to another, and we started to pilot, and we started to test the theory, and put the people that we were sending overseas, the ones that were in the Cowan network. Okay. They ended up becoming part of the sort of the pilot programs that we were running to see, is this a valid offering? And the one thing that people would say at the end of those pilots was, I wish I had this 30 years ago. Like, where was this, in my life? And how come I was never taught this? And I even had one gentleman, when we started running programs under Canada Coach Academy, he was the head of Pfizer Indonesia. Yeah. And he said to me after a program, he said, in my 30-year career, I've done so much leadership and training and development. And I've been in every program and every, all the big, names out there I've done and tried. And he said, and I've never experienced something so transformative than your program. And I mean, I don't know if it was the program or if it's the concept of coaching. I think it's both, in the way that we delivered, but right. It's that powerful, it's a very transformative experience for a lot of people.
So you've touched on the power, and so thank you for that. First off, Nat, I appreciate the background story is always good, the origin story, if you will. So I appreciate you providing that. You touched on the power of coaching, and it's really interesting, because unless you've sort of been a part of a coaching model, or been coached or coached, or you've gone through training as a coach like I have, I don't know if you fully understand or recognize it. You hear coaching, and some people sort of mix it up with like therapy as an example. I wonder if you sort of provide that distinction for those who aren't totally familiar with coaching and are sort of hearing it but not really fully understanding it.
The difference between coaching and therapy is an important one. And I think it's actually a really good topic, because coaches really focus on present and future and future. So I always think about coaching as being, focusing on where you have the most power, which is the present moment, and then designing your future, right? Learning from the past while you're doing it. So when we talk about the past, it's about challenging our beliefs, and it's about recognizing that there is perspective, and that time changes perspective, and what do we learn from that? So it's about being really present with the learning, and then deciding on, where am I going with this? What do I want? What's the vision for what I want? So we think about emotion as data. We look at the different aspects of, what goes on in someone's life. We always take a whole person approach in coaching. So thinking about, I'm a professional, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a wife. All of that is considered in, the approach of coaching. Where therapy, I think, is more about a prescribed approach to helping someone where, the therapist is the authority in the room. In coaching, it's a partnership of equals. The coach is there as a partner, but the client is the expert in their own life. And we approach in that way. It's a very client-centered approach. So, and therapy is often focused on the past and understanding the past. And we don't want to, we believe that the most power you have is now to, as I said, design the future.
Yeah. I always, when I start to even understand the coaching model myself, I think that a couple of things that stood out to me, and I'll talk about the curiosity, because that's something else that I've just blown my mind, when the idea of, maintaining curiosity to suspend judgment. That was like a wow, eureka thing for me. But the other part around where that I've also appreciated understanding is allowing people to be, as you just said, being the expert in their own lives, and the genius that they have, that it's there. And so that process is a matter of farming that out, or mining that out, if you will, but they have the answers.
They have the answers. Yeah, people need time to think. And I think that that's one of the biggest opportunities that coaching provides. Nancy Klein wrote the book, Time to Think. And in it, she says, the mind that holds the problem holds the solution. And I really believe that wholeheartedly, when we give people the time and our attention, we know that someone's thought process and clarity is directly correlated to the attention we give them. So if you can think of the last time you're talking to somebody who's texting while you're talking, or busy doing something, washing dishes while you're talking, your clarity is fogged up because you're just thinking about, are they paying attention to me? Do they hear me right now? Do I matter? Right. But when you give someone your full attention and you are present with them, they become smarter right before your eyes, right? They're clear and they can start to process their thinking. And it's really profound. And a lot of people, we actually joke among the facilitation team, we say, it's not coaching unless someone's crying, because it's really intense when you know that someone's really paying attention to you and you feel like you matter. It might be the very first time that you feel that way. It might be the very first conversation you've had in months, if not years or ever, that you felt that way. And so it gets emotional. And I've seen that with CEOs, alpha males, alpha females. Like, I've seen it with all kinds of characters who just suddenly tear up, and they're surprised by it because it's that power of presence, I think.
A friend of mine recently shared a story with me. I think it illustrates what you've just said beautifully. He was talking about he had been for several years, he'd been working this company and applying for jobs over and over, and wasn't getting any opportunities. And he decided to not leave his work, but sort of go outside and develop himself in other ways. And through this development process, he gained these skills that he eventually brought back to the company. And he tried, and he applied for a job, and he actually got it. And he talked about just how tearful he was and emotional he was, because it was like, wow, they finally saw me. Like, they finally recognized, oh my gosh, the powers I have and the potential I have and the skills I have. And now he's progressed on with his career. But to your point, the acknowledgement that, for people to hold space for you, it does wonders for them. It really, really does.
And I think that, I'm reminded of you saw this in the Life and Wellness program, Oprah's commencement speech at Harvard, where she says, from Beyonce to Obama, all of us have this common link as humans, and we are more alike than we are different in that aspect. And it is, do you see me? Do you hear me? Do I matter to you? Right. And when we can help people feel that way, it's so powerful.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. I think it really makes sense to sort of slide over into the power of listening. We sort of touched on that, but I think I'd like to sort of dedicate some time on that, because it is really important in terms of, we just finished talking about being seen and being heard and being understood. I guess in the coaching model, if you sort of talk about the significance of listening.
I think listening should be a subject in schools. I've said it many times, because we take it for granted. Because we have ears doesn't mean that we can listen. We can hear, but hearing and listening are very different, right? In fact, most people are waiting to speak. I think Simon Sinek was the first person to say that, and it's so true. It resonates. We wait to speak. We're not really able to shut off our brains long enough to take in and receive what we're hearing. And that means work. That means cultivating that skill. And it's not, I don't think it's someplace you arrive at, although you get better at it. It's something you have to do over and over and continuously be aware of and pay attention to get it right, you know? And as coaches, we learn a lot of strategies for listening actively because it takes activity to listen well. We can't just sit because our minds are too busy, right? We have a lot of space for distraction. We have a lot of space for judgment. We have a lot of space for assumptions. We have a lot of space for our egos too, right? That get in the way. Yeah. So all of that has to be self-managed. And one of the things I often tell students is the difference between a good and a great coach is someone who can self-manage all of that noise in your head to be present to the other person. So that takes a lot of energy, which is why coaching conversations can be very draining for the coach because we're so energetically connected to the other person and really making space for that listening. Because when we listen, we actually have to break down the barrier of our own experiences, right? To really hear the other person's experience from their point of view. And that it requires, you know, thinking about their context and what they're going through and not relating. You know, I love that when I say in our programs, I say typically in the first week or two, I'll say tell people, you know, do you think relating is building rapport and connection? And most people will be nodding their heads. Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah.
But then I'll say, well, what do you think if I say to you, you know, that relating is actually robbing someone of their experience? And they sit there and they're like, oh, right. The Me Too aspect of conversation. Yeah. The moment you say that, you've actually taken that person's experience and made it yours. Mm-hmm. And no two people's experiences are alike. Right. You know, if you're divorced and I'm divorced, it doesn't mean that our divorces went the same way.
Exactly. And what we're also doing is getting away from what the holding space that we're supposed to be, because we're there for the coachee. Yeah. But if we're talking about, I can relate to that because it happened to me, it becomes, as you said, it becomes my story now as a coach.
And we take up space, right? So holding space means being willing to make the other person the center of attention, right? I'm not in the circle with you, I'm holding it for you, you know? That's the difference. Yeah.
That's a good analogy. So as we talk about listening, I want to be clear on what are we exactly listening for when we're talking to our coachees?
Great question. So, you know, we always say coach the person, not the problem. Most people will listen for the problem when in conversation, right? We talk about, oh, this happened and then what happened and who said what and where were you and what time was it? And that is the story, right? Whereas coaches listen for beliefs, values, attitudes, you know, assumptions that are being made. We listen for the perspective and point of view. And so, because we know that everybody sees a situation differently, right? The best example is, you know, there's a glass and the glass has water in it. Mm-hmm. That's the fact, right? Glass with water in it.
Right.
But one person will come up to that glass and say, that glass is half full. The other person will come up and say, that glass is half empty. The other person will say, where's the coaster? Right? Each one of us will see the glass for what's important to us. But the glass is still a glass with water in it. The stories we tell is the meaning we make, and we all tell stories. So what we're listening for is the story the person's telling, but not about the detail. It's about the perspective, so that we can start to help them say, well, what else could be true? What else is possible here? What do you actually know for sure? And when they start to question those things, they're like, oh, we're questioning the reality, right? And, you know, Adler says personality is someone's personal reality. Well, we create our realities every day, and it's up to us to challenge the meaning we make of, you know, everything that we encounter.
And we're I mean, I like the word they use, challenge, but we're politely challenging.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, being in a coach, the number one, I think one of the most important things you do as a coach is to create connection, and you do that through intimacy and trust, right?
Right.
That's one of the core competencies of coaching, because it is a nurturing but challenging conversation.
Yes.
A lot of people want to think of coaching as a soft conversation, but in fact, it's very disruptive, because what we're doing is we're disrupting patterns of thinking, right? Mm-hmm. We're disrupting habitual behaviors, and that can be uncomfortable for people. Yes. But isn't that the beauty of growth? It's that discomfort that you feel from trying something new.
No, and you're absolutely right. That is the foundational piece of growth, right? Like, you get out there and you give it a shot. Yeah. You think of the first time you tried to ride a bike, as an example. You probably fell off. You may not have been good at it, but you tried anyways, and you build on that, and you build on, and you pedal one, you get one revolution, do another, and all of a sudden you're a rider. So I think it's the idea of trying and see where it takes you.
Yeah. It's so. I think if we could all spend some time reevaluating the meaning we give to fear, to failure, to feelings. We call them the F words in coaching. But the F words are actually really key areas of exploration. And if we can shift meaning for people, it can be so powerful, because suddenly failure is an opportunity for growth, right? Failure is an opportunity for learning. And then we can become more comfortable with failure and be willing to fail more if we allow ourselves. I mean, every great entrepreneur or inventor has failed
absolutely
hundreds of times to get to where they got. And it's that failure that created the learning, right?
Right. And not being afraid to fail and embracing that. That I heard an acronym, fear, false evidence appearing real. Right. Yeah. And so it makes you really look at something and go, okay, what am I really fearful of? Because there are times, Nathalie, where the fear that we have isn't even our own. It's someone else's that they may have put in us, or we've heard a story, or maybe it even came from our parents who, they've made us think that this is a certain thing you can't do. And if you do this, the bad things will happen. But when you sort of challenge that and go, well, why do I feel the way I do? Or where did this come from? There are a lot of times you're like, oh, that's not the case at all. Right?
Yeah. I mean, we know that when we break down fear, it loses its power, right? Mm-hmm. And we start to break it down and see what is it and what's the ultimate fear. We start to see that we can have a lot more control than we realize. And there's a lot more that we can do to prevent what we fear from happening, to then really step into our power, right? And that's how we do it in coaching. We explore fear. We can't ignore it, because that's where the opportunity is for pushing through. Those breakthroughs people talk about.
Oh man,
really all about pushing through fear, right?
Well, and the other interesting thing on fear is so I don't want to do this because I'm afraid this may happen. But what if it does happen? Then what next, right? Like, how bad can it be, or how can you recover from that bad or that perceived bad thing? So I think there's some aspects around fear that so when you talk about breakthrough, the breakthrough is, okay, I'm afraid this may happen to me, and if it does happen to me, I can recover, and then you sort of get into a whole other topic of building your own resilience and bouncing back from difficult situations. But you still have to face the fear in order to do that.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny you say bounce back, and I think I heard on a podcast recently, it's bounce forward. We don't bounce forward after resilience. Resilience makes you grow, right?
Right.
And I was just thinking about I just enrolled in a new course, and the topic is grief. Okay. I'm doing a master's at Harvard, actually, and this professor is incredible. And the very first class, she's challenging us to look at the social construct of grief and say, well, what is grief, and how do we cope with grief? And, and is this a healthy way of coping? Is there something that should shift, And I really thought that was so interesting, because there's so many things that we just accept because they're familiar. Yes. And we don't challenge our own, bias, our own way of thinking, because it's just so accepted and familiar.
Yes.
But what if we challenge? What happens when we start? And that's what we do in coaching. And that's what I think the beauty and gift of coaching is, that something is true until we start to question it, right? And when we start to question it, that's when new possibilities emerge, and then new choices, right? How do you want to be? So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love the idea of new possibilities, because again, when we on this, even this podcast, we talk about, how do you live your best audacious life, and how do you get to that better place or a higher level, and those are the possibilities. And the way you do that is you challenge your beliefs, you question why certain behaviors exist, you analyze your own part and processes to determine your action and how they've contributed. I think if you do all those things, and again, to support the coaching model, it's very future focused. It's looking forward, right? And how do we get from here to there? I'd love to switch over to the conversation about curiosity. It really is a personal favorite of mine. Like I said earlier, it was really just like an aha moment when I started to uncover the beauty of staying curious, and how we do that. I wonder if you could sort of elaborate a bit further on curiosity, and again, what it does for those who tend to be judgmental.
Well, I mean, curiosity is the most generous thing you can offer someone, right? It's the curiosity is you asking about me. And isn't that the most beautiful thing? And, to go back to that strategic coach program that was run by Dan Sullivan, one of the very first things I ever heard him say was, if you want someone to like you, ask a question and shut up. And I was like, that always stuck with me, because like, oh yeah, of course, like just ask a question and people start to talk, and they want to share, right? So curiosity, leading with curiosity, is you show people that you care about them, that you're interested in them, and you get to kind of uncover the layers. We all know that iceberg, metaphor for culture. Well, you get to go down into the iceberg to really understand, who is this person, and challenge your assumptions, because we make so many assumptions, right? When we see people, they say you make an impression in the first 5 seconds, but really that impression is all about you, not them. It's you projecting your stuff onto them, right? So how do we have to stop at one point and go, am I getting this right? Like, what am I missing? What do I need to think about and get curious about in this person? And I think that curiosity is the solution to diversity and inclusion. It is the way through. It's to stop and prevent stop and question our judgments.
Yes.
Lean into that learner mindset that Marilee Adams wrote about in her book. It's all about getting into that idea that, what am I missing? What do I need to know about this person? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What do they want? It's asking those good questions to move past judgment, right?
And judgment is that thing that will if we let it, it'll beat us up. It'll take us down this windy paths that aren't helpful to us, and will limit our possibilities. So it's really the idea of staying out of the judgment zone, and being curious. And although we're talking about being curious, within the coaching framework, it can apply to all aspects. Whether a coach, and even yourself, you can do it within yourself, remaining curious.
Yeah, and in the context of a coaching conversation, we tell coaches, because it's hard sometimes, somebody will be talking about something and you'll get triggered as a coach, and then you're in your judgment, right?
Right.
So we tell coaches, you don't have to agree, but you do have to accept. So the coaching space is an acceptance of a person's point of view without you having to give up your values or to give up what you believe, but to just create space for someone to share what they believe, right? And I think that that's something that we could talk about more as a society, is the difference between acceptance and agreement,
Well, going back earlier, and we talked about relating to people. We think that's really, really important, but it does take away from our ability to hold space for the people the individuals that we're coaching. And so, even going back to maintain curiosity, we're keeping the focus on the other person, not ourselves, because we're not there for ourselves.
Well, yeah, and empathy and compassion are a big piece of curiosity, right? We, at the same time, we may not agree, but we have to have some measure of empathy for others to be able to lean into their experience. And so when I think about empathy, I think about, it's not me too, it's I see you, I got you, this is, I've got your back. And it's about letting someone feel what they feel and not trying to save them or be the hero or fix them or even skim over it because it's too uncomfortable, right? We want to be able to acknowledge and hold space for emotion because emotion is data, right? Emotion is information for us. So I find people as I said, that people cry in coaching, after the crying is brilliance because that emotion gives way to, such powerful thoughts and ideas that wouldn't have come before, right? So it's this release and embracing that and creating space for it, inviting it in is so important.
I do love that point about emotion being data and how important that is. And in terms of allowing us to understand more about that individual. And so I think it's a really good point. So thank you. You said it earlier, but I want to thank you for raising that again, because it is significant in the overall information gathering, if you will, right? So watch for the tears, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said something earlier about goals, and I kind of wanted to circle back because goals are such an important part of how we move forward and make progress. And I feel like, well, in fact, there's a study that says that 83% of people do not set goals in North America. Yeah. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean they don't have goals. It means that we don't take time to think about what we want, visualize what that looks like, what it feels like, step into the experience of what we want, and breaking that idea down into incremental steps, right? And if we did that more, which is what coaching does, right? We're taking a vision for what we want and we're saying, let's go one step at a time. What can you do in this session to get closer to that vision? Yes. And that work alone, forget the coaching session. Like the coaching session is about clarifying the goal, right? When that person leaves the session, what do you think is happening? Right? We've worked on that dominant belief system, the RAS, right? The reticular activating system is now being fed with this clarity of what we want. And now I go out in the world and everything I notice feeds that goal. So we're being propelled towards what we want. So I just, I think that if anything, if people could just spend more time clarifying their goals, they would naturally gravitate towards them because that's how our psyche works, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point because you think you have all the because essentially what you're doing is you're attracting it to you and it's coming to you. It's no different than you there's a certain car, all of a sudden you get that car and you see other cars on the road and you're like, oh wait, I never saw these before. So you talk about the reticular activating system and that's what brings these and essentially it allows you to see them is really what it does.
Yeah, it's like this curtain opening up, like, oh, you were always there and I didn't see you. We all have moment, right?
That's it.
And so coaches really help people clarify their goals, and that makes a huge difference to what we attract and what we notice, right? So spending time there is really powerful. And the truth is that most people, because you've been coaching, and what do people do when they come into a coaching session? They say, I don't know, I don't want this, and I'm not sure, and maybe should I quit my job? It's like questions and I don't want, right? Right. So what we do is we turn the questions into statements and we turn the I don't to what do you want? So we're trying to help people shift towards moving towards what they want versus moving away from what they don't want, which is very different, right? Mm-hmm. So I think most people, when they come to coaching, I notice that a lot of people are in this avoidance or moving away from with the I don't talk. And it's a simple shift can help them move towards what they want, right?
Yeah, no, and shift, I think, is a great word. And shift to, again, we're talking about future focus and uncovering possibility, shifting in that direction. Because oftentimes, as you said, when you get into a coaching session, it doesn't start there, right? It starts with all the stories that you talked about earlier, right? And the stories, and you've got to weed through that. And oftentimes the presented problem isn't the actual problem or the issue.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, people need time to think, and they think through processing their thoughts, right? Through talk. Mm-hmm. So it's a really neat, it's a privileged position to be a coach, right? We're witnessing people at their most vulnerable sometimes, right? In the way, it's kind of like what Brene Brown says about being in the arena with blood on your face, like you're in the arena as a coachee, as a person being coached, because you're there with like, I'm sharing all of my inner thoughts and fears and the am I good enoughs and all those things that come up, right?
Yes.
So it's a great
talk about on that same topic. Talk about the feeling you would experience as a coach when you see someone get that breakthrough moment or that aha moment, or things all of a sudden make sense. What's that feeling like for you, Nathalie?
Honestly, I'm always surprised because I don't know, right? Like as a coach, you agree that you don't know what's coming. You don't know what the person's going through. And so when I'm asking questions and I'm leaning into someone's experience, I'm so into my curiosity that I'm not even, like I don't know the power of it at the time until it lands, right? We never know a question is powerful until it lands, right? Because any question lands differently on different people. So it's when it lands, it's kind of like, oh, cool. Like I didn't realize that was going to trigger something, I was in a coaching session the other day where a client started off talking about, skills development. And then I said, I noticed a little bit of an emotion or an energy. And so I said, do you mind if I share something I'm noticing? And noticed a little bit of shift in your energy. What was that about? And there was a pause, and suddenly she's the lips trembling. And it's like, she said it was sadness. I felt sadness in that moment. And then now we were talking about sadness, and we're talking about her emotion and her, like what she feels. And we went from skills development to sadness. And that ended up actually unearthing huge awareness for her. And then circled back to skills development. And her realization was that she wanted to learn to become more empathetic as a listener. And that was something that she felt was she was lacking. And so it all came full circle, but it was interesting how that one little moment of observing someone and paying attention led to an emotion that was truly created an aha moment for her.
Literally pulling that piece of thread, if you will, and see what unravels, right?
Yeah. And you don't know, like, I don't ever pretend that I know. Right. Sometimes observations land, sometimes they don't, right? It just depends on, but the point is that we're there and we're paying attention, we're witnessing, we're mirroring, we're reflecting because we're leaning in, right? And then that you don't know. And sometimes it's an aha moment. And sometimes that aha moment comes days after the coaching session, or I'll get a call from a client and go, oh my God. And they're like, what? And they're saying, I just got it. Oh, okay. It's so fun. Yeah.
That's the delayed reaction. I love it.
Yeah.
Nathalie, one other thing that I absolutely wanted to talk with you about, I think we sort of alluded to it, but a tool, I think it's a powerful tool for coaches, and that's the usage of clean language and how that helps the coaching process. I wonder if you can sort of explain for our listeners, what is clean language and why is it so effective?
Oh, when I learned about clean language, my coaching practice shifted incredibly. So coaching is all about, honoring a person's experience. And to do that, as I mentioned, we have to self-manage our own experience. So clean language is a way to do that. And that practice was designed by David Grove, and he was a therapist who noticed that the therapists on his team, when he observed them in practice, they were leading their clients with certain words and language and body language and facial expressions And, people are inherently pleasing. And so we tend to go down the road that we feel is accepted by others when we start to talk about stuff. Right.
Right.
So he said, well, what if we take all that out and we just make things really client-centered without, doing the best we can not to lead at all, not to influence the conversation.
Yep.
So he designed clean language. And clean language sounds a bit awkward sometimes, but it actually is so powerful. And when you're really using it in a coaching session, like people don't even notice it. Right, when we're learning it as coaches, we're like, oh, this is weird. But, when you're using it in a coaching session, I've never had anybody go, why did you just ask me that way?
Why are you speaking that way?
But it's just about taking any adjectives, descriptives, opinions, anything out of the question and really making it as clean and open as possible for the person to go where they need to go with it, right? So something that, what's that like, is a very clean, open-ended question. It's short, it's simple. It doesn't have any preconceived notions in it, right? Or
so what's that like as opposed to
maybe paraphrasing something that you heard and then saying, and what do you think about this? Most of our questions have instructions in them because most people ask closed-ended questions, right? Like, have you ever thought of running that program this way? And then, inviting a guest speaker and like we start to add, we're asking a question, but really we're telling them what to do or we're giving them our opinion, right? Whereas clean, open-ended inquiry it eliminates all that. It takes all of that out. So it's, what's most important to you? What becomes possible then? If you say a metaphor, I'm going to say, what's that like for you? What else can you say about that? I'm not bringing in suggestions. I'm simply inquiring about what is for the client.
And that takes some real practice, as you said. Our questions oftentimes are filled with, I guess, unclean language, if I could put it that way.
Yeah, well, I always joke with students. I'm like, the opposite of unclean isn't dirty, okay? And they're like, oh, okay.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah.
But I can certainly see where it's a powerful tool. Certainly takes some practice to use because of how we generally communicate already it is full of questions and leading and showing and even paraphrasing as an example. We're taught that it's a good thing. Like we should paraphrase what we hear people say, and generally it makes sense when you're in everyday communication, and that shows understanding, acknowledgement. But in the coaching sphere, it's a bit different.
Paraphrasing is a very, very important communication skill, and it's applied all the time in, relationship therapy, in mediation, negotiation. I think it's an important skill in those areas. It doesn't serve coaching because it does have that element of me picking out what's important to me, interpreting the other person, whereas coaching is a space where we really want people to meet themselves for the first time through you by your reflecting and witnessing them, right? So it's the purpose of coaching is different, but paraphrasing is an absolutely great skill in other types of communication.
Right.
And that's what makes coaching a different, conversation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I hear you loud and clear. And I think it's a great tool and that can be used and used appropriately, is what I would say, right? In the right venue. Nathalie, I really appreciate the chat, and I do thank you for taking the time like this to have this conversation. I think from the stat, in terms of what we want to offer on this podcast continually is about ways that we can think of our lives differently and how we can do things differently. And certainly there's many aspects within the coaching framework that we can take from coaching models that can be applied to our own lives. And so I want to say thank you because your presence here has helped help us meet our objective here on this podcast. So I appreciate you taking the time like this.
No, really pleasure being here. It's my favorite thing to talk about on a Friday morning with coffee. It's kind of fun. So thank you for having me. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
And so for listeners who are taking this in and want to learn more, obviously Canada Coach Academy is a good place to start. Where would you is that what we would suggest they go, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, we have a website, CanadaCoachAcademy.com. We have our socials. Really, it's just about, I always tell people, just ask around, I mean, coaching is a growing profession. It's very trending right now. And we love what we do. So feel very, very blessed every day.
Awesome. Nathalie, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time again, and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Back, we are here on the podcast, and much thanks and appreciation goes out to Nathalie for being here and broadening our understanding into the kind of difference a professional coach can make in helping others. And again, as we take our own audacious journey, it becomes important that we get that support. If you're interested in further developing your understanding of the coaching practice, or maybe it's something that you want to explore yourself, I'd encourage you to visit Canada Coach Academy online for more information. So again, thanks, Nathalie, for being here. I really appreciate the conversation that Nathalie had about the coaching space. And if there's just one thing I take from the chat that we had, it would have to be this. Living a truly audacious life means embracing boldness, pursuing dreams, and pushing beyond our comfort zones. But audacity isn't just about our individual journeys. It's also about supporting others on their pursuit of greatness. By creating a space, actively listening, and being non-judgmental, we can empower and uplift those around us, helping them live audacious lives of their own. Creating space is about providing nurturing environment where individuals feel safe and supported to explore their passions, ideas, and aspirations. It involves giving them the freedom to express themselves authentically and without fear of judgment. We can create space for others by doing things like the encouraging open dialogue, where individuals are invited to share their thoughts and ideas without interruption or criticism. Embracing diversity can create an inclusive environment that respects and appreciates different backgrounds, experiences, and viewpoints. Active listening is a powerful tool that allows us to connect deeply with others and understand their desires, challenges, and aspirations. By genuinely listening, we create a space where individuals feel heard, valued, and understood. Active listening involves being fully present and giving your undivided attention when someone's speaking. Avoid distractions and truly focus on what they're saying. By showing empathy, we seek to understand their perspectives by putting yourself in their shoes. This allows us to connect on a deeper level and validate their experiences while showing you care. The last thing we can do is be non-judgmental, which is crucial in the supporting of audaciousness. By suspending judgment, we create an environment where others feel safe to take risks and make mistakes. Cultivating curiosity and understanding and providing focused, constructive feedback also help achieve this as well. Living an audacious life isn't just an individual pursuit, it's a collective journey. By creating space, actively listening, and practicing non-judgment, we can empower others to embark on their own audacious paths. When we create space, we allow individuals to explore their passions and ideas freely, fostering an environment that encourages boldness and innovation. Active listening enables us to truly understand others, validating their experience and providing support as they need to pursue their audacious goals. And by being non-judgmental, we create a safe space where individuals can take risks, learn from failures, and continue growing. So let's commit to creating an active listening space and exercising non-judgmental in our actions with others. Let's encourage audacity by fostering an environment where dreams are nurtured, voices are heard, and compassion reigns. Together, we can inspire and empower one another to live audacious lives, breaking free from limitations and embracing the extraordinary. We've sadly come to the end of another episode of the most audacious podcast the internet has to offer. And as always, I send my thanks and appreciation to all those encouragers of audaciousness and those that love to explore and break free and go beyond their present circumstances. So thank you so much for the support. It is so much appreciated. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.